mother smashed through the soundproof partition of my bedroom with a sledgehammer to frame me as insane. All because she wanted to steal the $3 million trust fund my grandmother left specifically for me. I am currently hiding in a hotel room, my hands trembling as I clutch the hard drive that holds the only proof of my sanity against her vicious lies. My stepfather and mother painted me as a dangerous monster to the police and our neighbors, claiming my desire for privacy was a sign of madness, all while they secretly plotted to lock me away in a facility and drain my bank account. They had no idea that behind the drywall they were destroying, tiny lenses were recording their every word, capturing a conspiracy so vile it makes me question if they ever loved me at all. I watched the people who raised me turn into predators on that screen, and I had to make a terrifying choice between being their victim or becoming their executioner. I pulled the trigger on the truth, and now my mother is facing prison time because of me. I stood over the wreckage of my family and felt nothing but a cold, hard silence where my heart used to be. Is it justice to destroy the woman who gave you birth to save yourself? Or have I become the very thing she accused me of being? I feel like I have lost my soul to save my future. Please tell me, was I wrong to record them? My name is Emily Vance. I am 17 years old, a senior at Oak Creek High with a 4.0 grade point average and a stinging resentment that sits in my chest like heartburn. To the outside world, I am just another overachieving teenager trying to secure a spot at Yale or Stanford. But inside the four walls of this peeling, beige ranch-style house in the suburbs of Dayton, Ohio, I am a hostage. I am a walking wallet. I am the golden goose that everyone is waiting to slaughter. Technically, I live here. This is my primary residence according to the custody agreement signed 10 years ago, back when my father, Robert, was too heartbroken and spineless to fight for full custody. Now, he is a partner at a top corporate law firm in Chicago, sending fat child support checks that somehow vanish before they ever touch my tuition fund, and here I am, stuck in the orbit of Sarah, my biological mother, and Gary, the man she married 6 months after the divorce because he had a motorcycle and a pulse. I sat at the kitchen table, the sticky vinyl surface clinging to my forearms. The air in the house always smelled like a mixture of frying grease and Gary's cheap menthol cigarettes, a scent that seemed to weave itself into my expensive cashmere sweaters. I adjusted my noise-canceling headphones, a birthday gift from my father, trying to drown out the cacophony of my reality. My two half-brothers, Brayden and Tyler, 8 and 10 years old respectively, were currently screaming at a video game in the living room. They were feral, unchecked creatures who had never heard the word no in their lives. I looked down at my MacBook Pro. The screen was the only clean, orderly thing in my peripheral vision. I was trying to finish my admissions essay, but the bass from the television was vibrating through the floorboards. This was the false peace we lived in, a precarious balance where I pretended not to notice that Gary had been between jobs for 3 years, and they pretended not to notice that I bought my own clothes, food, and technology to avoid owing them a single cent. I learned early on that in this house, every favor came with an invoice. I took a deep breath, slid the headphones off, and turned to face the living room. It was time to execute the plan I had been formulating for weeks. Mom, Gary, can I talk to you guys for a second? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly modulated. I had practiced this tone in the mirror. It was polite, submissive, and completely fake. Sarah looked up from her phone, She was 42 but tried desperately to pass for 30, wearing heavy makeup that settled into the fine lines around her eyes. She was wearing one of my old hoodies that she had borrowed without asking. "What is it?" "Emily, we are watching a show." She sighed, as if her entire day had not been spent scrolling through Facebook. "I need to discuss my study arrangements," I said, standing up and walking to the threshold of the living room. "Finals are coming up, and then advanced placement exams. I need absolute silence to focus. The current setup in my room is not working. Since the boys got older, Sarah had forced me to move my desk into the corner of the shared recreation room so Brayden could have my closet space for his toy collection. I was basically studying in a hallway. "So, just wear those expensive headphones your dad bought you," Gary grunted, not looking away from the television. He cracked open a can of beer, the sharp hiss cutting through the tension. "Headphones are not enough," I said calmly. "I have a solution. I want to install a high-end partition wall in the recreation room. It is a temporary structure, fully soundproof, with a locking door. It would effectively create a private study cubicle for me until I leave for college." Sarah's eyes narrowed. The air in the room shifted. It was not the concern of a mother. It was the predatory alertness of a shark sensing blood in the water. "And who is paying for this construction?" Sarah asked, her voice dropping an octave. I replied instantly. "Dad transferred the money to my personal account this morning. I have already contacted a contractor. It will not cost you or Gary a dime." I watched her face carefully. This was the test. A normal parent would be relieved that their child was taking initiative for their education. A normal parent would be happy that it was not costing them anything. But Sarah was not normal. Her eyes flickered to Gary, then back to me. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head. She was not thinking about the wall. She was thinking about the money. She was thinking about the fact that her ex-husband had wired thousands of dollars to me, and she had not seen a penny of it. "You think you can just build walls in my house?" Sarah stood up, crossing her arms. Her voice began to tremble with that practiced theatrical victimhood she was so famous for. "Do you think you are better than us, Emily? Is that it? You want to lock yourself away from your brothers, from your family? It is just for studying." "Mom," I said, keeping my hands clasped in front of me to hide the fact that they were shaking. Not from fear, but from suppressed rage. "It is unsafe," Gary chimed in, finally looking at me. His eyes were bloodshot. "What if there is a fire? What if you get sick in there? We need to be able to see you." "You are a minor." "I am 17, I countered, "and the wall meets all fire safety codes." I checked. "You are so secretive lately," Sarah said, walking toward me. She stopped just inches from my face. I could smell her cloying vanilla perfume, masking the scent of stale wine. "Why do you need a lock, Emily? What are you hiding?" I looked into her eyes and saw the red flags waving violently. She did not care about safety. She did not care about fire codes. She was terrified of losing access. If I built a wall, I built a boundary. And to a narcissist like Sarah, a boundary was an act of war. She reached out and tugged a strand of hair behind my ear. Her touch was cold. "We will think about it," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "But, Emily, you know we only want what is best for you. We just do not want you to isolate yourself. You know how you get. So you jinghao, lean, dva, moody." There it was, the first seed. How I get. She was already planting the narrative that I was unstable. I forced a smile. "Of course. Mom, thanks for considering it. I turned and walked back to my corner of the kitchen. As I put my headphones back on, I did not play any music. I just activated the noise-canceling feature. Through the silence, I could still hear them whispering. I saw Gary lean in and say something to Sarah. I saw Sarah pull out her calculator application on her phone. They were not discussing the wall. They were calculating how much the contractor would charge, and how much of that money they could guilt-trip me into lending them if they said yes. I looked down at my hands. They were steady now. I knew they would agree eventually. Greed always won with them. But I also knew that the moment that wall went up, the real war would begin. They thought I was locking myself in. They had no idea I was actually locking them out. And inside that small, soundproof box, I was preparing to burn their entire parasitic world to the ground. The contractors arrived on a Tuesday morning, a pair of burly men in clean blue coveralls that smelled of sawdust and fresh timber. Their presence in our house felt alien, like a transplant of the civilized world into a chaotic jungle. They moved with efficiency and purpose, hauling panels of acoustic foam and heavy sheets of drywall into the recreation room. I stood in the hallway, clutching my backpack straps, feeling a rare surge of satisfaction. This was my money at work. This was my territory being staked out. Gary, of course, could not simply let them work. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, leaning against the jamb with his arms crossed over his stained t-shirt. He was not working today. He had not worked in 3 years, citing a vague back injury that curiously only flared up when job interviews were mentioned. He watched the men work with a sneer of unearned superiority, offering unsolicited advice about load-bearing beams and stud spacing. "You guys are overcharging for that labor," Gary grunted, taking a loud slurp from his coffee mug. "I could have put that up myself for half the price." One of the workers paused, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a gloved hand. He looked at Gary, then at the expensive tools scattered on the floor, and simply shrugged before turning back to his drill. The high-pitched whine of the power tool drowned out Gary's grumbling, and for a moment, it sounded like a symphony to me. I went to school that day feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I had a physical barrier, a line in the sand. However, when I returned home at 4 in the afternoon, the atmosphere in the house had shifted from passive aggression to active hostility. The wall was finished. It was beautiful, a sleek, white partition that cut the recreation room in half, creating a small, enclosed sanctuary for my desk and my bed. The door was solid wood, heavy and substantial. I walked into my new room and closed the door. The silence was instant. The screaming of the television in the living room was reduced to a dull, distant thrum. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 7 years old. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key to the new deadbolt I had insisted on installing. But before I could turn the lock, the door was shoved open. Sarah stood there. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide and frantic. She did not look like a mother checking on her daughter. She looked like a warden who had just discovered an inmate digging a tunnel. "You cannot lock this door, Emily," she declared, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and feigned concern. I sat down on my bed, keeping my expression neutral. "We discussed this. Mom, I need privacy to study. The lock is part of the design. It is a fire hazard," she shrieked, stepping into my small space. Her presence made the room feel instantly claustrophobic. "If there is a fire, how will we get you out? What if you pass out? What if you have a medical emergency?" I stared at her, analyzing her panic. It was irrational. I was a healthy 17-year-old girl, not a geriatric patient prone to heart attacks. The fire hazard excuse was flimsy at best. This was about access. She needed to know that she could barge in at any moment. She needed to know that nothing I owned was truly mine. I will keep the key in the lock from the inside when I am here, I said calmly, trying to de-escalate, and I will leave it unlocked when I am not in the room. No, Sarah snapped. She held out her hand. Palm up. Give me the spare key. Now, if you do not give it to me, Gary will take this door off its hinges tonight. Do not test me. Emily, this is for your own safety. I looked at her open palm. The lines on her hand were deep, worn by years of bad decisions, but her grip was still strong enough to choke the life out of my independence. I knew that if I fought her now, I would lose the wall entirely. Gary was looking for an excuse to destroy it. I could hear him pacing in the hallway, muttering about disrespect. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the spare key. I placed it in her hand. Fine, I said. If it makes you feel better. Sarah closed her fingers around the cold metal, and instantly, her demeanor changed. The rage evaporated, replaced by a sickeningly sweet smile. She patted my cheek. See, that was not so hard. We just love you. Honey, we need to be able to reach you. You isolate yourself too much. It is not healthy. She turned and left, leaving the door slightly ajar. As she walked away, a dark, cold thought uncoiled in my mind. Good. Let her have the key. Let her think she won. I did not build this wall just to study. I built it to provoke them. I built it because I knew that a narcissist cannot stand a closed door. I wanted to see how far they would go to violate my boundaries. I wanted to see how desperate they were. The encroaching began almost immediately. 2 days later, I came home from school to find my door closed, just as I had left it. But when I stepped inside, the air felt different, stale. Someone had been in here. I walked over to my desk. I am meticulous about my workspace. My biology textbook had been placed on the top left corner, aligned perfectly with the edge of the desk. Now, it was shifted 2 inches to the right. A small difference, imperceptible to anyone else. But to me, it was a screaming alarm. I opened my top drawer. My pencils were still there, but the small velvet pouch where I kept my spare change was lying on top of my stapler, not beside it. I walked out into the kitchen. Sarah was chopping onions for dinner, her eyes watering. Mom, were you in my room? I asked. Sarah did not even look up. No, why would I be in your room? Things have been moved, I said, keeping my voice steady. My textbook, my drawer. She slammed the knife down on the cutting board, the sound echoing through the small kitchen. Oh, here we go. She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. She turned to Gary, who was sitting at the table. Did you hear that, Gary? The princess thinks we are spying on her. You are paranoid. Emily, Gary sneered, not looking up from his phone. Nobody cares about your boring books. You are imagining things. Sarah wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked over to me, her face full of pity. Honey, have you been sleeping enough? You sound delusional. Maybe all this studying is making you see things that are not there. Maybe we should take you to see a doctor. I looked at them both. The mockery in Gary's eyes, the false concern in Sarah's. They were gaslighting me. They had absolutely been in my room. They were looking for something specific. They were looking for cash, or maybe the password to my bank account, or perhaps my diary, but they were sloppy, and they were arrogant. I did not argue. I did not scream. I just nodded slowly. Maybe you are right. Mom, I said softly. Maybe I am just tired. I went back to my room and closed the door. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with adrenaline. They thought they were making me question my sanity. They thought they were breaking me down. They had no idea that I had expected this. They had no idea that the invasion was exactly what I needed. I sat down at my desk and looked at the electrical outlet near the floor. It looked completely normal, but inside the plastic casing, hidden behind the faceplate, was a tiny, high-definition camera lens that I had installed before the drywall went up. I opened my laptop and pulled up the encrypted file. Let us see who is really delusional. I whispered to myself. The house was finally silent. It was 2 a.m. on a Thursday, the darkest part of the night where the silence felt heavy and thick, like a woolen blanket pulled too tight over my face. Outside my window, the suburban streetlights of Dayton hummed with a sickly orange glow. But inside my partitioned room, the only light came from the screen of my laptop. My hands were cold. It was a specific kind of chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room and everything to do with the dread pooling in my stomach. I had spent the last 3 hours studying for my advanced placement European history exam, but not a single date or treaty had stuck in my mind. All I could think about was the tiny, blinking red dot on the interface of my hidden camera software. The system had flagged 4 motion events while I was at school earlier that day. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, not to block out the world this time, but to hear every whisper, every breath, and every lie that had been spoken in this room when I was not here to defend it. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I felt like Pandora standing before the box, knowing that once I opened it, I could never unsee the demons that would fly out. I clicked play on the first file. The video feed was crisp and high definition, a stark contrast to the grainy reality of my life. The angle was wide, capturing the entire scope of my small sanctuary from the vantage point of the electrical outlet near the baseboard. At 10 a.m, the door to my room opened. Gary walked in. He was wearing his usual attire, a stained gray undershirt and sweatpants that hung low on his hips. He did not look around with curiosity. He looked around with entitlement. He scratched his stomach, a gesture so casual and grotesque that I felt bile rise in my throat. He was chewing gum, his jaw working rhythmically. Like a cow grazing, I watched, frozen, as my stepfather began to dismantle my privacy. He did not just look, he hunted. He moved to my bed and lifted the mattress, checking underneath, finding nothing. He moved to my desk. He pulled out every drawer, dumping my pens and highlighters onto the floor before carelessly scooping them back in. He picked up my geometry textbook and shook it violently, hoping, I assumed, that dollar bills would flutter out like autumn leaves. Nothing dropped out. Furious, Gary kicked my wastebasket. It slammed into the new white wall, leaving a black scuff mark. Damn it. I heard him mutter clearly through the audio feed. Little bitch holds on to every penny. He spent another 5 minutes rummaging through my closet, checking the pockets of my winter coats. When he came up empty-handed again, he stood in the center of the room, hands on his hips, breathing heavily. He looked directly at the wall where the camera was hidden, his eyes glazed with frustration. For a terrifying second, I thought he saw it, but he just spat on my floor. A wet glob of saliva landing on the rug I had bought with my birthday money, and walked out. I paused the video. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The violation was visceral. I felt dirty, as if his hands were on me, rummaging through my pockets. But beneath the disgust, a cold fury began to crystallize. He was looking for money. He was desperate. I took a sip of water, my hand trembling slightly, and clicked on the second file. This one was time-stamped at 1 p.m. This time, Sarah entered first. She was followed closely by Gary. Sarah looked different when she thought no one was watching. The mask of the beleaguered, a loving mother, was gone. Her face was sharp, her movements precise and predatory. She walked straight to my desk and picked up my iPad. She tried to unlock it, her fingers tapping in code after code. When it failed to open, she slammed it back down on the desk. She locked it down. Sarah, he said. She changed the passcode again. I told you, Gary said, leaning against my door frame, crossing his arms. The kid is smart. She knows we are on to her. She is not smart. Sarah spat back, turning to face him. She is just selfish. She gets that from her father. Robert always thought he was better than everyone else just because he had a law degree. Now his daughter thinks she can sit in my house, eat my food, and hide her money from the people who raise her. I leaned closer to the screen. This was it. This was the narrative she told herself to sleep at night. We need that cash. Sarah, Gary said, his voice dropping to a whine. Tony called again. He said if I do not have the $5,000 by Friday, he is going to start breaking things. And he does not mean furniture. My blood ran cold. $5,000. Gary was in debt to a loan shark. That explained the desperation. That explained the anger. I know, Sarah snapped, pacing the small length of my room. But we cannot just steal it if we take it outright. Robert will sue us. He is looking for any excuse to cut off the alimony. We need to be smarter. She stopped pacing and looked at the new partition wall. She ran her hand along the smooth drywall, her expression shifting from anger to something far more sinister. A slow, calculating smile spread across her face. We do not need to steal the money, Gary, she said softly. We need to control it. What do you mean? Gary asked. Sarah turned to him, her eyes gleaming with manic intensity. Look at this wall. Look at the locks. Look at how she isolates herself. She sits in here for hours, wearing those headphones, refusing to interact with her brothers. She is obsessive. She is paranoid. She is just a stuck-up teenager. Gary shrugged. No, Sarah said, shaking her head. To a judge, she could be something else. If we document this behavior correctly, Xiaoyu Jingha Ling, 2# is greater than if we show that she is a danger to herself. Xiaoyu Jingha Ling, 2# is greater than that she is mentally unstable. Xiaoyu Jingha Ling, R. Jinghao Dayu. I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs turned to stone. Sarah continued, her voice gaining confidence. My mother left that trust fund entirely to Emily. It unlocks when she turns 18. That is next year. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Gary, but if Emily is deemed mentally incompetent, Xiaoyu Jingha Ling, 2# is greater than if she is placed under a conservatorship. Xiaoyu Jingha Ling, R. Jinghao Dayu. Like that pop star? Britney something? Gary asked, perking up. Exactly, Sarah said, snapping her fingers. If I am her legal guardian, I control her finances. I control her decisions. I control the trust fund. We could pay off your debt. renovate the kitchen, buy a new car. So yu Jing Hao Ling. 2 hashes greater than, and we would be paying ourselves a salary for taking care of her. I stared at the screen, paralyzed. My mind could not process the magnitude of what I was hearing. This was not just bad parenting. This was not just greed. This was a conspiracy to enslave me. She wanted to strip me of my rights, my future, and my autonomy, all to fund her husband's gambling addiction and her own vanity. But how? Gary asked, sounding skeptical. She gets straight A's. She is the golden girl at school. Sarah laughed. A dry, humorless sound. That is just the surface. We start planting seeds now. I have already told the neighbors she is hearing voices. I told the Parent-Teacher Association she was caught with inappropriate materials. We need to escalate it. We need proof. If we can make it look like she is hiding drugs or weapons behind this wall. Sao Yu Jing Hao Ling, 2 hashes greater than, or if we can provoke her into a violent outburst. Sao Yu Jing Hao Lin, R. Jing Hao Dayu. She paused, looking around the room again. We need to make her snap. Gary, Sarah whispered, we need to push her until she breaks. And when she does, we will be right there to call the police and the doctors. We will be the heartbroken parents who just want to get their daughter help. Gary grinned, showing his yellowed teeth. I can make her snap. That is easy. Good. Sarah said, start tomorrow. Mess with her things. Make noise. Do not let her sleep. We need her exhausted and irrational. The video ended. I sat in the silence of my room, the darkness pressing in on me. I felt physically ill. My stomach churned, and I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from retching. For 17 years, I had told myself that my mother was just flawed, that she was difficult. Yes, but that deep down, in some twisted way, she loved me. I had held onto that sliver of hope like a lifeline. Tonight, that lifeline was severed. She did not love me. She did not even see me as a human being. I was an asset, a resource to be mined. She was willing to destroy my sanity, to label me as crazy, to lock me in a legal cage for the rest of my life, just so she could access my grandmother's money. I looked at the scuff mark on the wall where Gary had kicked it. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and stinging, but I refused to let them fall. I wiped them away aggressively with the back of my hand. Crying was for victims. Crying was for the daughter she thought she had. The weak, vulnerable girl who could be gaslit into an asylum. But that girl did not exist anymore. She had died the moment I clicked play on that video. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a backup hard drive. My hands were no longer trembling. They were steady, guided by a cold, crystalline purpose. I copied the video files onto the drive. Then I copied them to a cloud server. Then I emailed them to a secret account I had created years ago. You want to play a game? Mother? I whispered to the empty room. You want to make me snap? I looked at my reflection in the dark computer screen. My eyes looked back at me, hard and unyielding. I stood up and walked to the mirror hanging on the back of my door. I smoothed my hair. I adjusted my pajamas. I looked at the face of the girl who was about to go to war. They wanted a villain. They wanted a crazy, dangerous girl. I would not give them crazy, but I would definitely give them dangerous. I turned off the light and laid down on my bed, staring up at the ceiling. I knew I would not sleep tonight. I lay there, listening to the house settle, listening to the breathing of the monsters in the next room. Let them come, I thought, let them push, because now I had the one thing they never expected me to have. I had the truth. And in America, The truth was a weapon, provided you knew how to aim it. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I did not pray for peace. I prayed for the strength to be absolutely ruthless. The next morning, the war moved from the shadows into the daylight. I walked out of my house at 7 in the morning to catch the school bus, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, but the weight of the neighborhood's gaze felt heavier. Sarah had been busy. I saw Mrs. Higgins, our next-door neighbor, watering her hydrangeas. Mrs. Higgins was the unofficial town crier of our subdivision, a woman who traded gossip like it was currency. Usually, she would wave and ask about my grades. Today, she stopped watering. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, her eyes darting over my outfit as if looking for signs of a breakdown. "Good morning, Mrs. Higgins," I called out, forcing a polite smile. She hesitated, then gave a stiff, tight-lipped nod before turning her back to me completely. I could practically hear the whispers swirling in her head, the poison Sarah had poured into her ear over coffee. "Emily is unstable. Emily is hearing voices. We are terrified she might hurt the boys." I kept walking, my grip tightening on my backpack straps. It was working. Sarah was rewriting my identity before I even had a chance to speak. The isolation at school was subtle but present. I saw a few mothers in the parking lot, women from the Parent-Teacher Association, whispering and glancing my way. Sarah had played the concerned martyr mom card perfectly. To them, I was not the straight-A student heading to the Ivy League. I was the troubled teen whose poor mother was trying everything to save her. But the real ambush waited for me at home. When I walked through the front door that afternoon, the house was unusually quiet. The television was off. There were no video game noises. Instead, there was a tension so thick it felt like the air pressure before a tornado. Sarah was sitting in the living room. Opposite her sat a woman I did not know. The woman was middle-aged, wearing a sensible gray blazer and holding a clipboard. She looked like every bureaucrat I had ever seen. Tired, skeptical, and overworked. "Emily," Sarah said, standing up. Her voice was trembling, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying for hours. "This is Miss Joyce. She is a counselor from the district. We, Soyitsing Holing, 2# is greater than Gary, and I thought it would be good for you to talk to someone." I stopped in the entryway. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained a mask of calm. This was step 2 of the plan I had heard on the tape. Document the behavior. Bring in professionals. "Hello, Emily," Miss Joyce said, offering a small, pitying smile. "Your mother has been telling me that things have been difficult for you lately, that you have been withdrawing." I looked at Sarah. She was wringing her hands, performing the role of the desperate mother with Oscar-worthy commitment. "I am fine, Miss Joyce," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am just studying for finals. I have 3 advanced placement exams next week." Sarah let out a small, choked sob. "See? She is in denial. She spends 18 hours a day behind that wall. Miss Joyce." She locks the door. We hear her talking to herself, screaming at people who are not there. The lie was so bold, so disgusting, that I almost laughed. But I knew laughing would look manic. I knew anger would look defensive. Sarah was baiting me. She wanted me to scream, to call her a liar, to throw a tantrum so she could point a finger and say, "See, she is crazy." I did not take the bait. I do not talk to myself. "Mom," I said softly, I recite my history notes out loud to memorize them. It is a mnemonic device. Miss Joyce scribbled something on her clipboard. May I see your room? Emily, your mother mentioned you have built a Sauting dos barricade. It is a study partition. I corrected gently, and yes, you may see it. I led them to the recreation room. The white wall stood stark and clean against the dingy beige of the rest of the house. I unlocked the door with steady hands and swung it open. The room was immaculate. My bed was made. My books were stacked by height. My laptop was closed. There were no drugs, no disturbingly violent drawings on the walls, no signs of chaos. Just the disciplined sanctuary of a student trying to escape a chaotic household. Miss Joyce stepped inside. Looking around, she seemed underwhelmed. This clearly did not match the house of horrors Sarah had described. It is very Ling. 2# is greater than organized. Miss Joyce noted. Sarah pushed past her. Frantic now, she opened my closet. Shoving my clothes aside, she pulled out my desk drawers. She hides it. Sarah cried, her voice rising in pitch. She hides the evidence. She has these Ling. 2# is greater than fits of rage. You did not see her yesterday, Miss Joyce. She looked at me with eyes that were just Ling. 2# is greater than black. Dead. I am telling you, my daughter is not safe to be around my young sons. Gary appeared in the doorway then, playing his part. He put a hand on Sarah's shoulder, looking solemn. We are just scared. Ma'am, we found a knife under her mattress last week. We took it away, but we are terrified she has another one. I stood in the corner, watching them. The accusation of a weapon was a new low. It was a direct attempt to get me placed on a psychiatric hold. In Ohio, if they could prove I was an immediate danger to myself or others, they could have me committed for 72 hours. And once I was in the system, Sarah would file for emergency guardianship. I did not have a knife. Miss Joyce, I said, I have never had a knife. Miss Joyce looked from Sarah's hysterical face to my calm one. She looked at Gary, who smelled faintly of beer, even at 4 in the afternoon. She looked at the pristine room. Mrs. Vance, Miss Joyce said slowly, closing her clipboard. While I appreciate your concern, I do not see any immediate evidence of self-harm or manic behavior here. Emily seems quite lucid. Sarah froze. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the viper beneath. She glared at the counselor with pure venom before quickly covering it with a fresh wave of tears. You do not believe me? Sarah wailed, collapsing onto my bed. You are going to wait until she kills someone? Until she hurts herself? I am her mother. I know something is wrong. Miss Joyce C. Hill, I can recommend a family therapist. Mrs. Vance, but I cannot recommend involuntary intervention based on what I am seeing today. Emily, I suggest you try to spend more time with the family. Isolation can be unhealthy. I will. Miss Joyce, I said dutifully, thank you. When the counselor left, the silence that descended on the house was terrifying. Sarah stood in the living room, watching the woman's car drive away. She was not crying anymore. Her face was dry and hard as stone. You think you are so smart, do not you? Sarah whispered, not turning to face me. I did not answer. I walked back toward my room. Run along to your little box. Gary sneered as I passed him. Enjoy it while it lasts. I went into my room and locked the door. My legs finally gave out, and I slid down the wall until I hit the floor. I was shaking uncontrollably. I had won the battle, But the war had just escalated. The counselor visit was a test run. They were checking to see what would stick. I looked at the hidden camera lens in the outlet. I hoped it had caught everything. Sarah's lies, Gary's false accusation about the knife. But as I sat there in the dim light, I realized something terrifying. Sarah was not going to give up. The legal route had failed today, which meant she would get desperate. Narcissists do not accept defeat. They just change tactics. If she could not convince the world I was crazy with words, she would have to manufacture a reality where I looked crazy. I looked at the pristine white walls of my sanctuary. They felt fragile now. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that they would not protect me for much longer. The spiraling had begun, and the bottom was coming up fast. The Friday afternoon sun was blinding as I walked up the driveway, casting long, sharp shadows against the aluminum siding of our house. The air was unseasonably warm for Ohio, but as soon as I stepped onto the porch, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. The front door was wide open. It hung on its hinges, swaying slightly in the breeze. My first instinct was panic. I thought of burglars. I thought of Gary owing money to dangerous men. I dropped my backpack on the porch and ran inside, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Mom? Gary?" I called out, my voice echoing in the hallway. There was no answer. The living room was empty. The television was silent, but there was a sound coming from the back of the house, from the direction of the recreation room. It was a low, rhythmic thudding, followed by the sound of splintering wood. It sounded like a demolition site. I ran down the hallway, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. The air grew thick with dust, white and chalky, tasting of drywall and violence. When I reached the doorway of the recreation room, I stopped. The breath left my lungs in a painful rush, as if I had been punched in the stomach. My sanctuary was gone. The beautiful, white soundproof partition I had paid for with my own money lay in ruins. It had not just been taken down. It had been obliterated. Jagged shards of drywall covered the floor like snow. The wooden studs were snapped in half, their splintered ends pointing up like accusations. My desk was overturned. My books were scattered across the room, their pages torn and crumpled under heavy work boots. And there, sitting on my bed amidst the wreckage, was Sarah. She looked like a queen on a throne of garbage. She was covered in white dust, her hair disheveled, her face flushed with exertion and manic triumph. In her hands, she held the one thing I had kept hidden for 3 years, my leather-bound journal. Gary stood next to her, leaning on a sledgehammer, his chest heaving. He was sweating profusely, grinning like a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "You are home early," Sarah said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. She did not look guilty. She looked vindicated. "What did you do?" I whispered. The words felt inadequate. This was not a mess. This was a violation so deep it felt physical. "We saved you," Sarah said, standing up. She waved the journal in the air. "We knew you were sick. Emily, we knew you were hiding things behind that wall, and we were right." She opened the journal to a marked page. I felt the blood drain from my face. That journal contained my darkest thoughts, my vents about their abuse, my desperate plans to escape. To her, however, it was just ammunition. "Listen to this, Gary," Sarah said, reading aloud in a mocking theatrical voice. "I hate them. I hate the way they breathe. Sometimes I wish the house would just burn down so I could walk away from the ashes. She snapped the book shut and looked at me with wide, horrified eyes. Arson. Emily, you want to burn us alive? This is a threat. This is proof of homicidal ideation. I stepped forward, my hands shaking. Give that back to me. That is private. Privacy is a privilege, not a right. Gary roared, slamming the head of the sledgehammer onto the floor. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. You gave up your privacy when you decided to plot against your family. We found everything, Sarah said, gesturing to my overturned desk. We found the hidden cash in your sock drawer. $200. Where did you get that, Emily? Selling drugs? Selling yourself? It was birthday money from Grandma. I screamed, the control finally slipping. Lies. Sarah shrieked back. She picked up my iPad, which was sitting on the bed next to her. The screen was cracked. We are taking this to the authorities. We are taking this to the judge. This journal proves you are a danger to yourself and to us. She took a step toward me, clutching the journal to her chest like a holy relic. I have already called Dr. Evans, she said, her voice dropping to a sinister whisper. He agrees that, based on what I read to him over the phone, you need immediate psychiatric evaluation. We are filing for emergency guardianship on Monday morning. By next week, I will have full legal control over your medical decisions and your finances. I looked at her, really looked at her. For years, I had seen my mother as a pathetic, weak woman controlled by her impulses. But I was wrong. She was not weak. She was a monster. She had destroyed my room, violated my deepest secrets, and was now planning to imprison me in a legal system I might never escape from, all to get her hands on an inheritance that did not belong to her. She smiled. It was a small, sad smile that did not reach her eyes. It is for your own good. Baby, you are not well. You will thank us later when you are cured. I looked at the debris on the floor. I looked at the sledgehammer in Gary's hand. I looked at the camera lens hidden in the electrical outlet near the floor. It was covered in a fine layer of dust, but the tiny glass eye was still clear. It had seen everything. It had recorded Gary swinging that hammer. It had recorded Sarah's glee as she read my diary. It had recorded their confession of the plan to use my private thoughts to steal my freedom. Something inside me snapped, but it was not the break they wanted. It was not a break into madness. It was a break into absolute, crystalline clarity. The fear evaporated. The sadness vanished. In their place, a cold, hard resolve settled in my chest, heavy and solid as a stone. I stopped shaking. I straightened my spine. I wiped the single tear that had escaped my eye. You are right, Mom, I said softly. Sarah blinked, confused by my sudden change in tone. I am? Yes, I said. I looked her dead in the eye. You have done exactly what you needed to do. I did not scream. I did not fight for the journal. I did not try to save my books. I simply turned around and walked out of the room. Where are you going? Sarah called after me, her voice shrill with sudden uncertainty. Emily, get back here. We are not done talking. I walked down the hallway, past the open front door, and out onto the porch. Emily, Gary yelled. I kept walking. I walked down the driveway, past the manicured lawns of the neighbors who thought I was crazy. I walked with a steady, purposeful stride. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had cornered the rat and cut off its escape. But they had made a fatal error. They had destroyed the wall. Yes, but in doing so, They had destroyed the only thing keeping me from destroying them. I reached into my pocket and felt the cool metal of the flash drive I always kept on my keychain. The backup, but I did not need the backup yet. I needed to get to safety. I needed to get to a screen. I was not the victim anymore. I was the witness. And as I walked toward the end of the street, pulling my phone out to dial the one number Sarah terrified me to never call, I knew one thing for certain. I was never going back to that house, and by the time I was done with them, they would wish they had let me keep my wall. I did not make it to the end of the block. The sound of heavy boots slapping against the pavement came first. A rhythmic thudding that grew louder with every breath I took. I did not run. Running would have been an admission of guilt, a sign of the hysteria they were trying to paint onto my skin like scarlet war paint. I kept walking, my spine rigid, my eyes fixed on the stop sign at the corner of the street. Then, a hand clamped down on my upper arm. It was not a gentle grip. It was violent, browsing, the fingers digging into my bicep with enough force to cut off circulation. I was spun around, the momentum nearly knocking me off balance. Gary stood there, his chest heaving, his face a mottled map of red rage and exertion. "Where do you think you are going?" he snarled, his spit landing on my cheek. "Let go of me." "Gary," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You are not going anywhere," he shouted. He dragged me back, toward the house. I stumbled, my sneakers scuffing against the asphalt. I looked around, desperate for a witness. Mrs. Higgins was still standing on her lawn, her watering can dripping onto her shoes. She watched Gary manhandle me, her eyes wide. "Call the police," I yelled to her. "Please." Mrs. Higgins did not move. She looked at Gary, then she looked at me. The girl her neighbors said was crazy, the girl who supposedly hid knives. And she turned her back. She walked up her porch steps and went inside, closing her door with a definitive click. That was the first tragedy of the night. The realization that the world does not care about the truth. It only cares about the most convenient narrative. To Mrs. Higgins, it was easier to believe I was a troubled teen being escorted home by a concerned stepfather than to accept that a crime was happening on her manicured lawn. Gary shoved me through the front door of our house. Sarah was waiting in the hallway. She had wiped the dust from her face, but her eyes were still wild. "Give me your phone," she demanded, holding out her hand. I clutched my pocket. "No." Gary grabbed my wrist, twisting it until a sharp bolt of pain shot up my forearm. My fingers reflexively opened, and the phone clattered to the floor. Sarah snatched it up immediately. "You are grounded, Emily," she hissed, her face inches from mine. "No phone, no internet, no leaving this house until Dr. Evans sees you on Monday. We are going to lock you in your room for your own safety." She marched me down the hall, past the kitchen where we used to bake cookies when I was 5, past the living room where we used to watch movies before Gary arrived. She shoved me into the wrecked remains of the recreation room. The devastation looked even worse in the fading afternoon light. The white drywall dust coated everything like volcanic ash. My bed was covered in debris. My clothes were strewn across the floor. "Stay in here and think about what you have done," Sarah said. She slammed the door. I heard the lock turn. Then, I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone. The sound of a hammer pounding a nail into the wood. They were nailing the door shut. I stood in the center of the room, listening to the muffled sounds of the television turning back on in the living room. They went back to their routine. They had destroyed my sanctuary, stolen my privacy, and imprisoned me. And now they were watching a game show. I sat down on the mattress, pushing aside a jagged piece of drywall. I did not cry. The time for tears had passed. I checked my pockets. I still had the flash drive on my keychain. They had taken my phone, but they had been too arrogant to search my pockets for a small piece of metal. Hauling. 2 hash is greater than I waited. Time moved like molasses. The sun went down, and the room plunged into darkness. The streetlights outside cast long, skeletal shadows through the window. It began to rain. A slow, steady drizzle that tapped against the glass like 1,000 tiny fingers asking to come in. I knew I could not stay here until Monday. If I waited until Monday, they would have the doctors here. They would have the paperwork. They would drug me. Once I was in the system, sedated and labeled, my credibility would vanish. I had to leave tonight. At 2 a.m, the house was silent. I moved to the window. It was a standard single-hung window, old and drafty. Sarah had not nailed this shut. She assumed the drop to the backyard was deterrent enough. It was a 12-foot drop onto concrete patio pavers. I opened the window slowly. The sash groaned, a high-pitched protest that sounded like a scream in the silence. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I waited for the sound of Gary's footsteps. Nothing, just the snoring from the master bedroom down the hall. I pushed the screen out. It popped loose and fell into the bushes below with a soft rustle. I climbed onto the sill. The rain was heavier now, cold and biting. It soaked through my thin sweater instantly. I looked down. The darkness below was absolute. I turned around and lowered myself, hanging by my fingertips from the sill. The rough bricks scratched my palms. I took a deep breath, visualizing the landing. Bend your knees. Roll. Hauling. Dve. I let go. The fall lasted a fraction of a second, but the impact jarred every bone in my body. My feet hit the wet concrete, and I collapsed, rolling onto the grass to absorb the shock. A sharp pain shot through my left ankle, hot and searing. I bit my lip to keep from screaming. I lay in the wet grass for a moment, gasping for air. I tested my ankle. It throbbed, but I could move it. It was not broken. I stood up, limping slightly, and ran. I ran through the backyard, hopping the low chain-link fence that separated our yard from the neighbors. I ran through the dark, sleeping subdivision, the rain plastering my hair to my skull. I did not look back. I was afraid that if I looked back, I would turn into a pillar of salt, frozen forever in this suburban hell. I ran for 3 miles. My destination was a 24-hour diner near the highway on-ramp. It was a beacon of neon light in the gray storm. I burst through the doors, dripping wet, shivering violently, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely open my mouth. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Brenda, looked up from wiping the counter. Her gaze traveled from my soaked, muddy sneakers to my shivering hands, and finally to my face, which I knew was pale and streaked with rain. In a normal neighborhood, she might have asked questions, but this was a diner off the interstate at 2 a.m. Brenda had seen things. She knew the look of someone running for their life. "Honey, you look like you just swam across the river," Brenda said, her voice raspy but kind. She reached under the counter and pulled out a clean, dry dish towel. "Here, dry your hair. Thank you," I stammered, taking the towel. It smelled of bleach and coffee. "Do you have a phone? Please, it is an emergency." Brenda pointed to a landline on the wall near the kitchen entrance. "Dial 9 to get out." I walked over to the phone. My fingers were shaking so badly I misdialed the first time. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my hand, and dialed again. I knew the number by heart. It was the number I had been too proud, too angry, and too scared to call for years. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Sauding Hall Lean, Du Canceletto, e Maggiore hello. The voice was groggy, thick with sleep. My father, Robert, Dad, I whispered. My voice cracked. There was a pause on the other end. Then the rustle of sheets. Emily, is that you? It is 3 in the morning. What is wrong? They nailed my door shut. Dad, I said. The words tumbled out of me, fractured and raw. Mom and Gary, they smashed my wall. They took my journals. They nailed me inside my room. I had to jump out the window. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For a second, I thought the call had dropped. Where are you? Robert asked. His voice was no longer sleepy. It was wide awake, sharp, and terrifyingly calm. The voice of the high-powered attorney who destroyed people for a living. I am at the diner off exit 42. The one with the neon coffee cup sign? Stay there, he commanded. Do not move. Do not go outside. Sit in a booth where the waitress can see you. I am coming, Dad. You are in Chicago. I sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing. That is 5 hours away. I will be there in 3, he said, and then he hung up. I sat in that booth for 4 hours. Brenda brought me hot chocolate and a plate of fries I could not eat. I watched the rain streak against the black glass of the window, terrified that at any moment Gary's truck would pull into the parking lot. Every set of headlights that swept across the diner made me flinch. But Gary did not come. At 6:15 in the morning, a sleek black Mercedes sedan pulled into the lot. It looked out of place among the rusted pickup trucks and 18-wheelers. My father stepped out. He was wearing a tracksuit over his pajamas and a trench coat, looking disheveled in a way I had never seen him. I ran out the door. He caught me on the sidewalk. He did not say a word. He just wrapped his arms around me and held me so tight I could barely breathe. He smelled of expensive cologne and fear. I buried my face in his coat, and finally, for the first time in years, I let myself be a child. I wept. I cried for the wall. I cried for the betrayal. I cried for the mother I wished I had and the monster I got instead. Get in the car, he said softly, opening the passenger door. We drove to the nearest high-end hotel in Dayton. My father did not ask questions during the drive. He just drove with one hand on the wheel and the other gripping my hand, as if he was afraid I would vanish if he let go. In the hotel suite, the luxury was jarring. The carpet was thick, the sheets were crisp white, and the silence was heavy. I took a long, hot shower, scrubbing the mud and the feeling of Gary's grip off my skin. When I came out, wrapped in a plush robe, my father was sitting at the desk, his laptop open. He had ordered room service, eggs, fruit, coffee, but neither of us had touched it. Emily, he said, turning his chair to face me. His eyes were red. I need to know everything. I need to know exactly what happened so I can burn them to the ground. I did not speak. I reached into the pocket of my wet jeans, which were drying on the radiator, and pulled out the flash drive. I put this on the desk. Watch the last 3 files, I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. My father plugged the drive into his laptop. I sat on the edge of the bed, hugging a pillow to my chest, unable to watch. I heard the clicks of the mouse. Then, I heard the audio. I heard the sound of the sledgehammer hitting the drywall. Crash, crash. I heard Sarah's voice, shrill and excited. We knew you were sick. Emily, we knew you were hiding things. I heard Gary reading my diary. Privacy is a privilege, not a right. And then, I heard the conspiracy, the part where Sarah detailed her plan to file for conservatorship, to use the doctors to label me incompetent, to steal the trust fund money, to pay off Gary's gambling debts. I watched my father's back. He went rigid. His shoulders rose and fell with heavy, ragged breaths. He watched the entire video in silence. When it ended, the room was deadly quiet. The only sound was the hum of the hotel air conditioner. My father closed the laptop. He did not turn around immediately. When he finally did, his face was unrecognizable. The sadness was gone. The guilt was gone. In their place was a cold, lethal fury that made the air in the room feel thin. He stood up and walked over to me. He knelt down, so he was eye level with me. He took my hands in his. "I am sorry," he said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I am so sorry I left you there. I thought, Saoyuting Haling. 2# is greater than I thought. She was just difficult. I did not know she was evil. It is not your fault." "Dad," I whispered. "No," he said firmly. "It is my fault, but I am going to fix it." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city of Dayton below us. He pulled out his phone. "Pack your things. Emily, we are not staying in Ohio, and we are not going back to that house. What are you going to do?" I asked. He dialed a number. "I am going to call my partners," he said, his eyes hard as flint. "And then I am going to call the district attorney." "Your mother wanted a legal battle? She wanted to use the law to hurt you?" He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw where I got my ruthlessness from. "I am going to show her what the law actually looks like when it is wielded by someone who knows how to use it. Sarah just lost everything. Emily, she just does not know it yet." Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The storm from the weekend had passed, leaving behind a cold, damp humidity that clung to the windows of the sleek black town car my father had hired. We were sitting outside the Montgomery County Courthouse, a formidable building of limestone and granite that looked designed to crush hope. I sat in the back seat, my hands folded in my lap. I was wearing a navy blue blazer and dress slacks my father had bought for me the day before. The clothes were armor. They were expensive, tailored, and mature. Everything Sarah had tried to strip away from me. My father sat beside me, reviewing a stack of documents thick enough to be a novel. He was no longer the man who had wept in the hotel room. He was Robert Vance, the litigator. His face was a mask of cold, professional detachment, but I could feel the heat of his anger radiating off him like a furnace. "We are going in through the side entrance," he said, not looking up from the papers. "My legal team has already filed the emergency motion for a temporary restraining order and a petition for an immediate change of custody based on imminent danger. The judge granted an emergency hearing because of the video evidence. What if she lies?" I asked. My voice was small, swallowed by the leather interior of the car. "She is good at lying. Dad, she believes her own lies." Robert closed the folder. The sound was sharp and final. "Let her lie," he said, turning to look at me. "In a court of law, a lie is not a shield. Emily, it is a trap, and she is about to step right into it." We walked into the courthouse, flanked by two of my father's junior associates. The air inside smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. We headed toward the family court division on the 3rd floor. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A hummingbird trapped in a cage. I kept waiting for Gary to jump out from behind a pillar, or for Sarah to start screaming. When we reached the waiting area outside courtroom 4, they were already there. Sarah sat on a wooden bench, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She was wearing a modest floral dress and a cardigan, her innocent mother costume. Gary sat next to her, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was 2 sizes too tight. He was sweating, his eyes darting around the room, checking the exits. When Sarah saw me, she stood up, her face crumpled into a mask of relief that was so performative it made my stomach turn. "Emily," she cried out, taking a step toward me. "Oh my God, baby, we have been so worried. Where have you been?" I froze. My instinct was to step back, to shrink away, but before she could get within 5 feet of me, a large man in a dark suit stepped between us. It was one of my father's security detail. He did not touch her. He simply occupied the space, a silent, immovable wall. Sarah stopped, blinking in confusion. She looked at the man, then at my father. "Robert," she said, her voice trembling. "What is this? Why are you keeping my daughter from me? She is sick. She needs her medication." She jumped out of a window. "Sit down, Sarah," my father said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that silenced the hallway. "Save it for the judge. You cannot do this." "Sarah," he said, the veneer cracking slightly. "I have rights. I am her mother." "You have the right to remain silent," Robert said coldly, "and I suggest you use it before you dig your grave any deeper." The bailiff opened the heavy oak doors. "All rise." We filed into the courtroom. It was smaller than I expected, intimate and terrifying. The judge was a woman in her 60s with severe glasses and an expression that suggested she had seen every variety of human cruelty imaginable. Her nameplate read, "Honorable Justice Beverly Thorne." We took our seats at the plaintiff's table. Sarah and Gary sat at the defense table with a court-appointed lawyer who looked like he had just graduated from law school and was already regretting his career choice. Justice Thorne shuffled the papers on her bench. She looked over her glasses at Sarah, then at me. "We are here on an emergency petition regarding the welfare of the minor, Emily Vance," she began. "The father alleges severe emotional abuse, physical endangerment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. These are serious accusations. Mr. Vance, they are not just accusations." "Your Honor," my father said. Standing up, he buttoned his jacket with a fluid motion. "We have irrefutable proof." Sarah's lawyer stood up, looking nervous. "Your Honor, my client maintains that the minor is suffering from a severe dissociative episode. The evidence the father speaks of is likely fabricated or taken out of context by a troubled teenager. Mrs. Vance was simply trying to protect her daughter from self-harm. The girl built a wall in her room to hide. 2 is greater than disturbing activities." Sarah nodded vigorously from her seat, squeezing out fresh tears. "We just wanted to help her," she whispered loud enough for the judge to hear. "She was writing about burning the house down. We were terrified." Justice Thorne looked at me. "Emily, did you write about burning the house down?" I stood up. My legs felt like jelly, but I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. "No, Your Honor," I said clearly. "I wrote that I wished the house would burn down so I could be free. It was a metaphor. It was a diary entry from when I was 14. Sarah gasped melodramatically. See? She admits it. She wants to destroy us. My father stepped forward. Your Honor, if I may, the mother claims her actions, destroying the child's room, confiscating her property, nailing her door shut, were acts of protection. She claims she intends to seek a conservatorship to manage my daughter's mental health. That is correct, Sarah's lawyer said. We have an affidavit from a Dr. Evans. Xiao Yu Jinghao Ling, R. Jinghao Dayu, who has never examined the child. My father cut in sharply, and who made his recommendation based solely on phone calls from the mother. But the motivation for this sudden concern for Emily's mental health is not medical. It is financial. Sarah went rigid. Gary shifted in his seat, wiping sweat from his upper lip. I would like to submit Exhibit A, my father said, a video recording taken inside Emily's room on Thursday, May 12th. Objection, Sarah's lawyer shouted. We have not seen this video. It was uploaded to the court's digital evidence portal this morning. Counselor, Justice Thorne said, looking at her computer screen. Overruled. Play the video. The bailiff dimmed the lights. A large monitor on the wall flickered to life. The courtroom fell silent. On the screen, the high-definition footage from my hidden camera began to play. First, the scene of Gary entering my room. The audience watched as a grown man rummaged through a teenage girl's underwear drawer, spitting on her floor, kicking her furniture. I heard a gasp from the court reporter. Then the scene shifted. Sarah and Gary standing in my room. The audio was crystal clear. If we document this behavior correctly, Xiao Jinghao Ling, 2# is greater than if we show that she is a danger to herself. Xiao Jinghao Ling, 2# is greater than that she is mentally unstable. Xiao Jinghao Ling, 2# is greater than my mother left that trust fund entirely to Emily. It unlocks when she turns 18. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Gary, in the courtroom. Sarah stopped crying. Her face went pale. Drained of all blood, she stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open, watching her own secret conspiracy broadcasted for the world to see. If I am her legal guardian, I control her finances. I control the trust fund. We could pay off your debt, Xiao Jinghao Lin. Our Jinghao Dayu. The video continued. The judge watched, her expression hardening into stone. She watched as Sarah plotted to gaslight me. She watched as they discussed planting drugs. She watched as they laughed about making me snap. Then came the footage from Friday. The sledgehammer, the violence, the sheer, unadulterated malice in Sarah's eyes as she sat on my bed and read my diary. Privacy is a privilege, not a right. Gary's voice boomed through the courtroom speakers. I looked at Gary. He was sinking lower and lower in his chair, trying to make himself invisible. He knew it was over. He looked at Sarah with pure hatred, as if she were the one who had dragged him into this, forgetting his own greed. The video ended with the sound of the hammer nailing my door shut. The lights came back on. The silence in the room was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that smelled of judgment. Justice Thorne took off her glasses. She placed them slowly on the bench. She turned her gaze to Sarah. It was a look that could have stripped paint from a wall. Mrs. Vance, the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. Do you have an explanation for what I just watched? Sarah stood up. She was shaking violently now, but it was not the shaking of a victim. It was the shaking of a narcissist who has lost control of the narrative. That, Xiao Jinghao Ling, 2# is greater than that was taken out of context. She stammered. We were just, Xiao Jinghao Ling, 2# is greater than role-playing. We were discussing hypothetical scenarios. That girl is a manipulator. She set us up. She planted those cameras. It is illegal to record people without their consent. In your own home? The judge asked. In a private room the child paid for? She is evil, Sarah screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You do not know her. She looks innocent, but she is cold. She watches us. Who watches their own parents? Someone who needs to survive them. My father said. Sarah turned on him. You abandoned us. You left me with 2 kids and no money. You owe me this. That money should be mine. My mother hated me, but I took care of her. I deserve that trust fund, not this ungrateful brat. Sao Yuzing Hao Ling. De dièse est supérieur à silence. Sarah froze. She realized what she had just said. She had just confessed, in open court, that her motivation was indeed the money. She clamped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She looked at Gary, but he was staring at the floor, refusing to meet her gaze. Justice Thorne picked up her gavel. She did not bang it. She held it like a weapon. In 20 years on the bench, the judge said, her voice icy, I have seen many bad parents, but I have rarely seen such calculated, predatory malice directed at a child. You conspired to defraud your daughter. You conspired to strip her of her civil liberties by falsely institutionalizing her. You committed perjury in your affidavit, and you engaged in domestic abuse. Sarah sank back into her chair, sobbing, but these were real tears now. Tears of self-pity, tears of a woman watching her future evaporate. The court grants the emergency protective order. Effective immediately, the judge ruled. Mr. Vance is granted full, sole, legal, and physical custody of Emily Vance. The mother is to have absolutely no contact with the minor. No phone calls, no visits. She is to stay 500 yards away from the minor at all times. The judge turned to the bailiff. Furthermore, I am forwarding a copy of this video evidence and the transcript of this hearing to the district attorney's office. I am recommending that charges be filed against both Sarah Vance and Gary Miller for child endangerment, fraud, and unlawful imprisonment. Gary bolted. He jumped up from the table, knocking his chair over. I did not do it, he yelled. It was her idea. She told me we needed the money. I just wanted to pay my bookie. I am testifying against her. I want a deal. Gary, Sarah shrieked, grabbing his arm. You coward. Gary shoved her off. Get away from me. You crazy witch. Bailiff, the judge shouted. 2 officers moved in, restraining Gary and Sarah. The courtroom devolved into chaos. Sarah was screaming, wailing that she was a good mother, that I was the devil, that I had ruined everything. Gary was shouting about plea bargains. I stood still amidst the noise. I watched them turn on each other. It was exactly as I had predicted. Their alliance was built on greed, and without the promise of money, it crumbled into dust. My father put a hand on my shoulder. It is over. Emily, let us go. I looked at Sarah one last time. She was being led away in handcuffs, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. She looked at me, and for a second, our eyes locked. There was no love there, only pure, unadulterated hate. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not happiness. It was not joy. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted, leaving behind a sore, empty space where the burden used to be. I turned my back on her. We walked out of the courtroom, past the stunned lawyer, past the bailiffs, and and into the hallway. The air out here felt different. It was lighter. My father looked at me. "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath. I inhaled the scent of floor wax and justice. "I am now," I said, but as we walked toward the elevator, I knew the battle was not entirely over. The legal war was won, but the social war was just beginning. Sarah was gone, but the whispers she had planted in the neighborhood, the rumors she had spread at school, those were still out there, and I had one more thing to do before I could truly leave Ohio behind. I had to face the court of public opinion. News travels fast in suburbia, but scandal travels at the speed of light. My father and I stayed at the hotel for another 2 days while he arranged for a moving company to clear out my remaining belongings from the house. We did not need to go back personally. The court order was specific, and the police were involved. But while my father handled the legal logistics, I handled the narrative. I sat in the hotel room, the glow of my laptop illuminating my face. I opened the neighborhood community page on social media. This was the digital town square where Mrs. Higgins complained about uncollected trash and where Sarah had spent weeks subtly painting me as a disturbed, dangerous teenager. There was a thread from 3 days ago. Sarah had posted, "Pray for our family. We are dealing with a mental health crisis with Emily. We are heartbroken, but doing everything we can to keep everyone safe." Beneath it were dozens of comments. "Stay strong. Sarah, you are such a good mother. Let us know if you need anything." I looked at those comments, and I felt a cold, hard knot in my stomach. These people believed her, even after the arrest, even after the court hearing. There would be whispers. There would be doubts. People would say that Robert Vance used his high-priced lawyers to bully a poor mother. Sarah would play the victim card until the day she died. Unless I burned the card, I did not post the entire video. That was evidence in a criminal trial. Instead, I posted a link to the public court docket, which was now a matter of public record. And then I posted a single, short clip from the hidden camera footage. It was the clip of Gary smashing the wall and Sarah smiling as she held my diary. Plotting to steal the trust fund, I added a simple caption. "The truth is not always what you are told. Thank you to the justice system for saving me." I hit enter. The reaction was nuclear. Within 20 minutes, the post had 50 comments. Within an hour, it had been shared to the high school parent group, the local church group, and the homeowners association page. I watched the digital tide turn in real time. The same women who had offered Sarah prayers were now recoiling in horror. Is that Gary holding a sledgehammer? Did she just admit she wants the money? Oh my God. I let my son sleep over at their house, the facade Sarah had spent a decade building. The image of this struggling, noble, self-sacrificing mother disintegrated. She was exposed not just as a criminal, but as something far worse in the eyes of suburbia. A fraud. By the time Sarah made bail and returned to the house on Wednesday afternoon, her world had already ended. I heard the details from the movers my father had hired. They told us about it later, shaking their heads in disbelief when Sarah's taxi pulled up to the driveway. There was no welcome committee. The street was eerily silent, but as she walked to the front door, she found that her sanctuary had been breached. Gary was already there. He had not been arrested immediately at the courthouse. He had been detained and released pending charges, having turned state's evidence against Sarah almost instantly. He had used that head start to return to the house one last time. Sarah walked in to find the living room stripped bare. The television was gone. The stereo system was gone. The laptop was gone. Even the toaster was missing. Gary had taken everything that could be pawned for quick cash. He was in the driveway, loading the last of it into his rusted truck when Sarah came running out, screaming, "You cannot take that. That is mine." Gary did not even look at her. He shoved a box of power tools into the truck bed. "It is over. Sarah, I am done. I am not going to jail for you. You promised?" Sarah shrieked, grabbing his arm. "We were partners. We were partners when there was money coming," Gary shouted back, shaking her off. "Now there is just a lawsuit and a felony charge. You are on your own." He got into his truck and revved the engine. As he backed out of the driveway, he ran over the hydrangeas Sarah had planted the previous spring. He drove away without looking back, leaving a cloud of exhaust and a broken woman standing in the driveway. But the final blow did not come from Gary. It came from the neighbors. Sarah stood there, watching the truck disappear. She looked around, desperate for an ally. She saw Mrs. Higgins standing on her porch across the street. Mrs. Higgins had been Sarah's coffee partner for 5 years. They had traded gossip and recipes. Sarah took a step toward her, wiping tears from her face, ready to launch into her routine. "Betty," Sarah called out, her voice cracking, "you have to help me. Gary took everything. You won't believe what Emily did." Mrs. Higgins did not wave. She did not rush over with a casserole. She stared at Sarah with a look of absolute, unvarnished disgust. She had seen the video. She had heard the audio of Sarah plotting to institutionalize her own daughter for cash. Mrs. Higgins turned around, walked into her house, and slammed the front door. Then she pulled the blinds shut, one by one. Down the street, doors closed, blinds were drawn, garage doors rumbled shut. The neighborhood turned its back. It was a silent, collective shunning. They were not just ignoring her, they were erasing her. Sarah Vance stood alone in the center of her driveway, surrounded by the wreckage of her life. She had no husband, she had no daughter, she had no money, and now she had no audience. I closed my laptop in the hotel room. My father walked in, carrying 2 coffees. "The movers said they are almost done," he said. "We can head to the airport in an hour." I nodded. I felt a strange sense of calm. "Dad?" I asked. "Xiao Yu Jing Hao Ling. Ketu." "Yes? Do you think she understands?" I asked. "Do you think she understands why this happened?" My father sat down and took a sip of his coffee. He looked thoughtful for a moment. "No," he said quietly. "People like Sarah never truly understand. She will spend the rest of her life thinking she is the victim. She will tell herself that you betrayed her, that Gary betrayed her, that the judge was biased. She will never look in the mirror and see the monster." He paused and looked at me. "But that does not matter, Emily. What matters is that everyone else sees it now. You took away her power to hurt you. That is enough." I stood up and walked to the window. We were high up, looking down at the sprawling city, somewhere out there. In that beige house, Sarah was sitting in an empty room, listening to the silence she had tried to force upon me. She wanted a wall. She wanted to separate me from the world. Now, she had the ultimate wall, a wall of silence from everyone she knew. She was trapped in the prison of her own reputation. I turned away from the window. "I am ready to go," I said. We left the hotel. We left Dayton. As the plane took off an hour later, climbing through the clouds toward Chicago, I watched the ground disappear. I watched the grid of streets and houses shrink until they were nothing but insignificant lines on a map. I was free, but as I looked at the clouds, I knew that freedom had come with a price. I had survived, But I had not come out unscathed. I had learned to be cold. I had learned to be calculating. I had learned that sometimes, to kill a monster, you have to sharpen your own teeth. The legal battle was over. The social battle was won. But the internal battle, the aftermath of realizing your own mother wanted to destroy you, that was just beginning. It took 3 months for the legal machinery to finish grinding Sarah into dust. The victory, when it finally arrived, did not come with confetti or a parade. It came in the form of a stack of court documents delivered to my father's penthouse in Chicago via courier. The judge had been ruthless. Sarah was stripped of all custody rights. She was ordered to pay restitution for the destruction of my property, a sum she did not have, to cover the damages and her own mounting legal fees. The court ordered the liquidation of her assets. The house in Dayton was sold. I returned to Ohio one last time in late August. Just before the closing date, my father did not want me to go. He said there was no point, that it was just a building, a shell of bad memories that I should leave in the rearview mirror. But I needed to see it. I needed to see the battlefield one last time to confirm that the war was truly over. The afternoon air was thick and humid, buzzing with the sound of cicadas. The lawn, once Gary's only point of pride, was overgrown. Weeds choked the flower beds where the hydrangeas used to bloom. A wooden sign in the front yard read "Sold," with a red sticker slapped across it like a bandage. I walked up the driveway alone. My father waited in the car, the engine idling, ready to whisk me away at the first sign of trouble. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside. The house echoed. It was a hollow, eerie sound, the sound of a life that had been packed up and erased. The furniture was gone. The pictures were gone. The walls were bare, punctuated only by the ghostly rectangles of discoloration where frames had once hung. The smell of stale cigarette smoke and frying grease was fading, replaced by the dry, chalky scent of abandonment. I walked down the hallway to the recreation room. The partition wall was gone. Of course, the mess had been cleaned up, likely by a service hired by the real estate agent. The room was just a room again, a box with beige carpet and cheap molding. It looked small. It looked insignificant. I stood in the center of the floor, trying to summon the anger that had fueled me for so long. But I could not find it. There was only a vast, aching emptiness. I turned to leave, and that was when I saw her. Sarah was sitting in the corner of the living room, on the floor, her back resting against the wall. I had walked right past her when I entered. She was so still, so small, that she had blended into the shadows. She looked 20 years older than she had 3 months ago. Her hair, usually dyed a vibrant blonde, was showing inches of gray roots. She wore no makeup. Her face was gaunt, the skin hanging loosely around her jawline. She was wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans that looked too big for her now. She did not look up when I stopped. She was staring at a stain on the carpet, tracing the shape of it with her finger, over and over again. "Hello, Mother," I said. The word felt strange in my mouth. Formal. Cold? Sarah stopped tracing the stain. She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were dull, clouded with a mixture of confusion and medicated exhaustion. She looked at me, but I was not sure she really saw me. She looked through me. "They took the toaster," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, unused. "What?" I asked. "Gary," she said, returning her gaze to the carpet. "He took the toaster and the blender. He said he paid for them, but he did not. My mother bought that blender for me when I got married the first time." She let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like dry leaves crunching underfoot. He took the ice trays. Emily, who takes ice trays? I looked at this woman. This was the monster who had terrorized me. This was the mastermind who had plotted to steal my inheritance and lock me in an asylum. She looked pathetic. She looked broken. The rage that had made her powerful was gone, extinguished by the cold reality of consequences. Without her anger, without her control, she was nothing. I realized then that I had not just defeated her, I had destroyed her. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. It was not guilt. I knew I had done what I had to do to survive. It was a deeper, more visceral kind of horror. I was looking at the woman who gave me life, the woman whose DNA was coiled into every cell of my body, and I felt absolutely nothing but repulsion. I realized that by winning, I had lost something too. I had lost the ability to ever be innocent again. I had been forced to reach into the darkest part of myself, to sharpen my own edges until I was a weapon capable of cutting her down. I had to become cold to survive the fire. You have to leave. Mother, I said quietly. The new owners get the keys at 5 o'clock. Sarah nodded vaguely, as if I had just commented on the weather. I have nowhere to go, she mumbled. Betty Higgins will not answer her door. That is not my problem, I said. The cruelty of my own voice shocked me. It was effortless. It was precise. It was exactly the kind of thing she would have said to me. I turned around and walked to the door. I did not offer her a hand. I did not ask if she had a ride. I could not save her. If I tried to pull her up, she would only pull me back down into the mud. I walked out onto the porch and closed the door behind me. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. I walked down the driveway to the waiting car. My father looked at me, searching my face for signs of tears. There were none. Is she in there? He asked softly. No, I lied. There is no one in there. It is just an empty house. I got into the car and buckled my seatbelt. As we drove away, I did not look back at the window. I stared straight ahead at the road stretching out before us, leading to Chicago, to college, to a future where I would be rich and successful and free. But as I watched the gray highway blur past, I rubbed my chest, trying to massage away the phantom ache. I had won the war. I had escaped the cage, but I would carry the scars of the bars on my skin for the rest of my life. I was free, but I was hollowed out, carved empty by the very victory I had fought so hard to achieve. I stand before the antique floor-length mirror in my dormitory room at Yale University. The glass is old, framed in heavy mahogany, reflecting a version of myself that feels miles away from the frightened girl in Dayton. I am 18 years old today. This morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, the trust fund legally transferred into my name, $3 million. It is a number that looks abstract on a bank statement, a string of zeros that signifies absolute, untouchable freedom. I pick up my lipstick, a deep shade of crimson, and apply it with a steady hand. My reflection stares back at me. I have my father's eyes, but I have Sarah's mouth. I have her ability to smile while calculating the cost of everything in the room. My phone buzzes on the desk. It is a notification from a lawyer in Ohio. Apparently, Sarah tried to contact me again. She is living in a state-subsidized apartment now, working part-time at a diner, the very same kind of place she used to look down on with such disdain. The lawyer says she wants to reconcile. She claims she has changed. She claims she misses her daughter. I swipe the notification away without opening it. I do not feel guilt. I do not feel sadness. I feel the satisfaction of a mathematician who has balanced a complex equation. There is something I never told anyone. Not the judge, not the police, not even my father. I look at my reflection, locking eyes with myself. I knew Sarah would tear down that wall. When I hired the contractors, when I spent my savings on that soundproof partition, I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew that a narcissist like Sarah could not tolerate a closed door. I knew that Gary was desperate for money. I knew that if I built a physical boundary, they would see it as a challenge. I did not build the wall to study. I built it to be destroyed. It was a trap, a bait. I placed the cheese in the maze and waited for the rats to come. I knew she would escalate. I knew she would get violent. I just needed to capture it on film. I sacrificed my privacy, my room, and my childhood peace to provoke her into showing the world exactly who she was. Does that make me a victim? Or does that make me a predator? My father thinks I am a survivor. He thinks I escaped a burning building by luck. He does not realize that I was the one who handed them the matches and waited for them to drop one. I finish applying my lipstick and snap the cap shut. The sound is sharp, like a gavel hitting a bench. I pick up my leather bag. I have a lecture on microeconomics in 20 minutes. I am going to learn how to manage my millions. I am going to build an empire, and I am going to do it alone. Sarah wanted to teach me a lesson about the real world. She wanted to show me that I was powerless. She wanted to strip me of my agency and turn me into a cash cow for her failures. She thought she was the player, and I was the pawn. She was wrong. I walk to the window and look out at the manicured quad of the university, where students are walking to class, laughing, unburdened by the weight of their own bloodlines. I am different from them. I have a scar on my soul that will never heal, a coldness in my chest that will never warm. But I also have the money, I have the control, and I have the silence I always craved. I speak to the empty room, my voice low and steady, delivering the verdict to a ghost that no longer haunts me. Mother wanted fairness. Now she is empty-handed, just like that husband of hers. That is my version of fairness. I turn off the lights and walk out the door, leaving the past in the dark where it belongs. The lesson is over, and I am the one who graded the final exam.